Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Sister Nancy Miller, Social Justice Coordinator for the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Sisters of St. Francis of Dubuque, Iowa. I welcome you to this virtual gathering of the intergenerational panel discussion, Voices of Hope on Care for Our Common Home. We are grateful that you have joined us this evening. We are excited to have 5 panelists who will be sharing their insights and passion in caring for creation. Before we begin our program, a few comments. This program is a Zoom webinar, so please know that you cannot turn on your camera nor your audio, but you are connected. At any time during the presentations, you may type in your questions for the panelists, and we will try to address them after all the panelists conclude speaking. A little background. This year, 2020, marks the 50th anniversary of the Earth Day and the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. To commemorate these special events, a committee was formed by the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Sisters of St. Francis of Dubuque, along with the Canticle of Creation Center. This committee, collaborating with about 30 city and county-wide organizations, all wanted to celebrate Earth Year. Thus, our panel discussion is a result of our efforts to spread the word and to care for our common home, Sister Mother Earth, and to address climate change. September 1st through October 4th marks the season of creation, and we wanted to host this event in this season of creation. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelists. I ask them to please turn on their cameras. And let me introduce, first of all, Sister Marie Segrin is a sister of St. Francis of Dubuque. She grew up on an Iowa farm with a father who cared for creation, and she says, "I have a love for all creation in my bones." As a member of the Sisters of St. Francis, she has been a part of many endeavors that demonstrated care for the earth. The congregation has established a natural burial site on their property, put 80 acres of their land into the Conservation Reserve Program, signed a conservation easement for 55 acres of their prairie and 13 acres of woods. They use geothermal and solar energy to heat some buildings. They do composting and grow some of their own vegetables and fruit. Marie is a member of their Green Team and the Mother Sister Earth Water Commitment Area and the Earth Community Opportunity Group. We welcome Marie. Chuck Eisenhart was born in Dubuque, Iowa. He attended Wahlert High School and graduated from Loras College with a degree in political science and mass communication, and earned a master's degree in journalism from Marquette University. Chuck owns his own business called Common Good Services, which offers communications, training and education, and other organizational services. Chuck currently serves in the Iowa House of Representatives and is the ranking member on the Agriculture and Natural Resources Appropriations Subcommittee and is on the Natural Resources, Transportation, Agriculture, and Ways and Means Committee. In the Dubuque community, Chuck has been a member of the Housing and Community Development Commissions, the Mental Health Developmental Disabilities Stakeholders Committee, Housing Coalition, Crescent Community Health Center Planning Committee, and the Downtown Neighborhood Council. He has also served on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity, Project Concern, and Dubuque Food Pantry, and is very active in many soccer organizations. We welcome you, Chuck. Jaron McGovern is a Piasta, Iowa native, Iowa State and Clark University alumnus, RAGBRAI gentleman, a husband and father, and is proud to call himself a river steward. Jared's passions and career align around conservation and outdoor education. He is a firm believer in the power people have to make positive changes in the world. As an Iowa boy, he loves to putz in his wildlife yard and play in the woods and on the river. As a curator of conservation programs at the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium, it is his mission to inspire stewardship by creating robust and fun educational, advocacy, and engagement experiences, especially for those who call the tri-state area of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois their home. Welcome. Sadie Victor participated in the Central Elkader School Green Team for 2 years until she moved to Dubuque in the Dubuque area. In 2019, she founded a Green Team at Dubuque Senior High School and is currently the president, working with others on taking on environmental-oriented actions for the school and Dubuque. This past summer, Sadie worked as a Green Iowa Sustainable Schools AmeriCorps member, helping local organizations and schools in various ways. After her graduation in 2021, she plans on going to the University of Iowa to earn a degree in environmental science. Welcome, Sadie. Corinne Shriver teaches a variety of science classes at Wahlert Catholic High School in Dubuque. In those classes, she works with students to explore the interconnection between their actions and the health of the planet. She tries to give the learning opportunities that help them to understand their actions can have negative or positive impact on the ecosystem and how the health of the ecosystem impacts them. She also oversees the LEAP Club, Leaders of Environmental Action and Protection, which strives to both educate and improve the local environment. We welcome you. We are so grateful that each of you could join us this evening and for all the work you do to be a voice of hope for our planet Earth. Now let me just give you an overview of our format for this evening. Each panelist was given 2 questions in advance. The 2 questions are, what do you see as an urgent need in your work for climate justice? And what steps can local community members take to address this need through actions and advocacy? Each panelist will have 11 minutes to speak and offer their insights. And after they conclude, then we will have 15 minutes for questions and answers. As I mentioned, the audience may type in your questions during the presentations, and then we'll field those questions after the panel finishes. And so now I ask the panelists to please turn off your cameras except for Marie. And let us begin with Sister Marie. Would you please turn your microphone and your cameras on? And we welcome you, and please begin.
Well, good evening, and I thank all of you for the opportunity to share with you this night my thoughts and insights related to climate justice. As I reflected on this issue, the word relationship kept popping up. My growing up years on the farm definitely shaped my relationship with all creation and influenced my life tremendously. My father was a conservationist. He employed methods of soil erosion efforts, crop rotation, and planting on the contour. His example helped me form my respect for the earth and all of its creatures. As a child and teenager, I spent much time outdoors exploring our many acres of woodland, helping with harvesting and planting crops, tending to a vegetable garden, and all the while being open to the teachings of nature. Observations of God's creation from the soil to the skies was and continues to be ongoing discovery for me. That interaction with creation, awareness of the community of life and our common home, was just part of my being. The first Earth Day occurred when I was in high school, so now you know about how old I am. But being on a farm, Earth Day was celebrated and acknowledged every day, directly and indirectly. We depended on the plants and animals and God to provide our livelihood. Entering the Sisters of St. Francis opened me to a broader understanding of humans' relationship to nature. Introduction to the Franciscan tradition led me to new insights into who God is and God's relationship to creation. Creation is God's word and reveals to us God's love. And so we are called to love each other and every creature. For creation arising from love is an image of God's word, and we are called to treat all creatures with special reverence. We humans should listen to creation, since we will be able to learn something about the meaning of life. As St. Thomas Aquinas says, an insight about creation is an insight about God. My relationship with creation has been deepened even farther as I tried to live these phrases from the Constitutions of the Sisters of St. Francis, which has set a firm foundation for us sisters as in caring for our common home. And I quote, called to simple living, openness to the presence of God in all people and creation, reverence for all creation, enjoyment of beauty around us, reverent care of the earth's resources through moderate use of material goods and commitment to just global distribution. Now, the Sisters of St. Francis mission statement provides another reminder to me of our connection to creation. It states, rooted in the gospel and in the spirit of Francis and Clare, the Sisters of St. Francis live in right relationship with all creation. Now, living in right relationship with all creation is quite a challenge. And I myself am still exploring what these words as a member of the Sisters of St. Francis mean and as a met creature of this planet. In 2019, we as a congregation approved a corporate stance, a public statement endorsing the Earth Charter, which was created in the year 2000, but is still very relevant today. I would like to share two quotes that also give direction to our care of creation endeavors. We must join together to bring forth a sustainable global society founded on respect for nature, universal human rights, economic justice, and a culture of peace. The choice is ours. Form a global partnership to care for Earth and one another, or risk the destruction of ourselves and the diversity of life. Again, these statements are all about relationship. As part of our mission statement, we have 3 commitment areas: deepen our relationship with Mother Earth and Sister Water, stand with persons who are poor, and make peace and practice nonviolence. We see how these 4 areas align with the 4 sections of the Earth Charter, which are respect and care for the community of life, ecological integrity, social and economic justice, democracy, nonviolence, and peace. Now in Laudato Si, the Pope tells us that Francis of Assisi shows us just how inseparable is the bond between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. In chapter 11, Pope Francis says that Francis of Assisi called all creatures, no matter how small or insignificant, brother or sister. In Francis of Assisi's Canticle of Creation, he refers to brother sun, sister moon, brothers wind and air, sister water, brother fire, sister earth, and sister death. Again, it is relationship. Pope Francis also says that solutions to the environmental crisis have been hampered by opposition and lack of interest, or as I see it, lack of relationship. So how can we help people form relationships with creation and see the urgency of this environmental crisis? Recently, I listened to a webinar featuring Dr. Katharine Hayhoe speaking on climate courage. She challenged her listeners to share our values and beliefs about creation with others, and she assured us that any actions and choices we make do make a difference. As you can guess from this presentation so far, the urgent need I see is for us to develop our relationship with all creation. We need to educate ourselves on the reality of climate change by regular reading. And some sources I use are Earthbeat, Iowa Interfaith Light and Power, or Power and Light, excuse me, TED Talks, the Earth Charter, and Laudato Si. And through that, I glean new insights. And above all, enjoy creation. Scientific evidence shows that being in nature helps us physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Now, the last line in our mission statement is perhaps the most challenging. It says, "This is who we are. This is what the global community can expect of us." So what can that global community expect of us? Well, I think it can expect of us to live simply so others may simply live, as Gandhi says. It can expect us to leave this world better than we found it. It can expect us to think of the common good when consuming resources. It can also expect us to deepen our personal relationship with all creation. So what can we do to address the climate crisis? Well, one way I think we can provide space and opportunities for people to interact with creation. Expose children to creation early and often. Spaces in the area like Swiss Valley Nature Center, the Mines of Spain, and our own Canticle of Creation Center are wonderful places. Perhaps provide times for free exploration where every adult has to be accompanied by a child. Perhaps form a Nature Buddies Club where both adults and children can deepen their relationship to creation and then recount or tell others about their experiences. And at this time of the year, one of the things that we must do is vote. Advocacy efforts are always important, and I'm sure Chuck will talk about that. But our late Ruth Bader Ginsburg offers this quote: "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." Personally, we can do some additional action. A recent quote on Facebook I saw said, "Focus on the step in front of you, not the whole staircase, healing one step at a time." Well, this step could be as simple as planting a garden with flowers that attract butterflies, installing a rain barrel in your yard, or taking a cloth bag for shopping beyond just for groceries. It could be for the drugstore or the department store. Set a good example. I'll give you an example from my life. A couple years ago, when we were talking about straws and how that was hurting the environment, I went out to eat with my family and I just told the waitress I did not want a straw. So my family was wondering why. So I explained why. And the next time we went out to eat, they followed suit. Well, another thing that happened was the following year at Christmas, 3 different family members gave me reusable straws. One was a package of 5 stainless steel straws. One was one you could take with you traveling, and one was a collapsible one. So I think they got the message. Another thing you can do is collaborate with organizations, local organizations. An example of what we did as sisters was a year ago, we offered a space on our campus for toxic waste pickup with the city of Dubuque. So I think more of those efforts could be implemented. Again, it's all about relationships. What we love and have a connection to, we will protect and nurture. Dr. Claire Butterfield says the following: "We must learn again to love the places we inhabit, know them like kin, which they are. We must see in the face of the earth the faces of our own children. Then we will know what to do." Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. That was lovely. And now we'll move on to our next speaker, Chuck. And Chuck, would you please turn on your microphone and your camera? And go ahead and begin.
Thank you very much, Sister Nancy, and kudos to the Sisters of St. Francis in my district, House District 100. I took a picture of your solar array and your prairie. You really do live the reality of caring for creation, and frankly, we need those as elected officials. We need those champions in our districts in order to have the courage and really the knowledge to take some of these issues to the next level. And this whole notion or the whole concept of developing relationships is huge. It's as true in politics as anywhere. We all need to have better relationships with our elected officials because politics is personal. And that really is the fundamental motivation for most people who get involved in politics, I believe, is that they want to do right by others. And so staying in close touch with others is hugely important. I want to give a shout out to my colleagues. I see Senator Pam Yocum is online as well, Senate District 50, and she's been a champion for many of these issues, probably for twice as long as I have in the Iowa State Legislature. I'd like to just kind of focus maybe a few comments that'll help you think about these issues and maybe inform a discussion later on. Some of you may have heard me say in the past that politics, public policy is a supply and demand economy. That over time, the political system, legislators will supply what their customers, i.e. the voters, demand. It might not be exactly what they're looking for. It might not be as fast as they want. But if voters are persistent, and I focus on voters, and not just the moneyed special interests, then voters will eventually and can eventually get their way. And so when you talk about the demand has to be more than just, one person. It has to be more than just one group, stakeholder. It has to be more than just one community. If a business is going to form to supply a market, they need to see that they can make money off it. They need to see that that is going to be a large, growing, and consistent demand before they make that investment. So that's really the challenge I see in terms of initially an urgent need in climate justice is assembling that demand. It also has to be consistent. If it's just once a year or only at election time or only in January when the state legislature convenes, you have to be persistent. I'm fond of using the parable of the widow and the judge. The widow just kept coming back to the judge saying, give me justice. And eventually he thought, the judge thought he was going to get hurt. And so here, woman, here's your justice. Now go away. And I think to a certain extent, politicians can be made to live in fear as well. And if you're just persistent and come to the system for justice, but it has to be a little bit in your face and it has to be continuous. The other thing in terms of assembling that, developing that need or demand is helping people as you develop relationships develop a sense of urgency. And I think that's one of the things that has made it difficult for us to make progress on climate issues is because it's such a broad issue. It's seen and perceived differently everywhere. The causes are multifaceted. It's a generational thing. It happens over decades, years, eons. We don't necessarily see it happening before our eyes, but we perceive the results, derechos, droughts, wildfires, etc. And so it doesn't really motivate us to act if we don't sense a near-term need or solution or benefit from that action. And we tend to be frozen or we demobilize in a sense when we see something that's so big, so far out there in terms of a solution. It's hard to figure out when and where to start. So it's kind of like the weather. I mean, we will react, we will make plans, we will organize our lives around the weather, right? It's going to rain, it's going to snow, we're going to drive, it's going to be slick. And people will make decisions that are in their best interest when it comes to the weather. And so the trick is, and I don't know the answer, I wish I did, how do we translate climate justice into issues that have immediate relevance to people in the way that weather does? And there may be some places, some doors we can open to get that started. But I think that's one of the things that we need to think about in terms of the conversations we're having and the relationships we're developing. I can just throw out maybe a good example of a situation that many of you may be familiar with. I'll describe that situation and then maybe end with a few comments on some specific areas where future conversation in Iowa can be, started. Many of the sisters are involved in the fight against human trafficking. We have our Tri-State Coalition. A couple of years ago, you convened when you started talking about how we're going to help hotels and motels start training their employees to recognize the signs and symptoms and how to deal with them. And we had an offhand conversation at that news conference about, well, what if the state said, a city, a county, a state employee couldn't spend money at a hotel or motel if they hadn't had their employees trained in human trafficking. And guess what? 2 years later, that bill is now law, and it's thanks to the work that many of you did, the groundwork you laid at the local level, that we were to come up with a simple but concrete example of something that we could do to help further that mission and that initiative down the line. It wasn't as simple as me and Lindsay James writing a bill. We did that. It didn't go anywhere 1 year. What made that work is the fact that the folks in Dubuque linked up with folks in the Quad Cities and also with folks in Des Moines who shared that broader commitment, but also were interested in that specific goal. And you sat down and you figured out who we needed to talk to, when we needed to talk to them, and what we needed to say, and you worked politics around that issue. And you made enough legislators sense that this is something that my constituents want me to do, that I can do, the risk is low, that it finally eventually got done. And I use that as an example because we need to figure out similar ways to get at the climate and the climate justice issues. I think we have a couple of resources in this state that we can call upon. And one of those resources is the sisters and the mother houses that we have all over the state. Another resources is some of the colleges and universities, including 27 private colleges and universities, some of them founded by you, and many of them you went to and you taught at. What if we were to get, some key people around the state in each of those institutions to say, we're going to work on climate justice. Here's the one or two, or maybe it's just one issue that we're going to work. We're going to do it at levels that we can succeed. Maybe it's changing practices in our individual institutions, like we're all going to get rid of plastic straws. It might be a common agenda that we're going to advance in our communities where we live, or it can be a collective effort to change public policy at the state level, or maybe it's creating a new program that we fund to address climate issues. That I see as the real urgent need to assemble folks around at the local levels all over the state, or in many places around the state, to advance a very specific cause that under that climate justice umbrella. And there's just a couple of things I'll throw out here, not to say that this is where any group should start, but it's a couple of areas where I and some of my colleagues in the Iowa House of Representatives have been persistent. And that is, ever since President Trump rejected U.S. participation in the Paris Accord, many governors around the state have said, okay, well, we as individual states are going to do our best to keep our obligations under the Paris Agreement, climate agreement. And we're going to start the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is an alliance of states led by the governors to engage in concerted action around 8 or 10 initiatives to do what the states can do to address climate catastrophes and climate action. To date, Iowa Governor Reynolds has not joined the U.S. Climate Alliance. Wouldn't be cool if we put together a big campaign to show her why that would benefit us, and kind of be like the widow going to the judge. In another area, I think it's worthy of more discussion, and I'll have a couple of books I might mention in response to questions. I think my time's running out, but agriculture is the number one factor in Iowa's economy. It's part of our image. It's what we're known for. The impacts of climate change are seen most dramatically in our agriculture. We've lost a quarter of our corn crop due to the derecho. But it's also true that the causes in many cases of global warming are rooted in our agricultural production system. Some people say if we don't address that system fundamentally, we might have only 60 or so harvests left in our soil. And if the climate continues to change, those impacts will be
conclude your
felt.
remarks.
So that's kind of where I wanted to leave it, as two ideas that might be worthy of later discussion, and looking forward to that.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for what you do in the House and for all your other efforts. And we continue on here with Jared. And Jared, would you please come on with your camera and turn on your mic? And Chuck will ask you to turn off your camera and microphone. Go ahead, Jared. Welcome.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jared McGovern with the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium. And I'm going to speak more towards not just the River Museum and Aquarium, but informal science learning centers as a whole. So I'm talking museums, science centers, County Conservation Board nature centers, and the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium, which is a member of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Before I do that, I got a joke. What do you call a computer program that composes songs? An algorithm. Okay, I'm moving on. So I wanted to start off here real quick by sharing two quick stories. One is, why I got into what I do, and then the other is why I continue to do what I do. I grew up out in Peosta, Iowa, and Thunder Hills Country Club was my backyard. We grew up on number 12, and so Thunder Hills has a ton of land that you may not realize that's part of the South Fork of Catfish Creek watershed. Springs popping behind number 4, springs popping behind number 14, springs popping behind number 2. And my dad took me back there a lot. In fact, when I was having birthday parties when I was in elementary school, we would go on hikes out in the woods. My parents, they really, really supported my love for wildlife and love for animals, zoo books, wildlife files, what have you. Now, fast forward quite a few years later, and I had just graduated from Iowa State University, and I landed my first full-time job working for the Pocono Environmental Education Center in Dingman's Ferry, Pennsylvania. And it was there where I was introduced to a group of students from the New York School of the Deaf on Manhattan Island. I spent 3 days with these students, and I exposed them. I worked with these students in an environment that they had never visited in their life. These were students that were from one of the largest cities in the world, and everything they did in this national recreation area was brand new. In fact, they were terrified on day 1. By day 2, they were really getting into their stride, and they were actually flipping over canoes just because they wanted to wade in the lake. And then by day 3, which was the day they were going to be departing, their teacher gave me my evaluation, and it made me cry. I had an impact on these students, and that was really, really uplifting. And I saw the students, and last I saw them was like 10 o'clock the night before at a campfire, and they were all down in the dumps. They're having a blast the night before, but this morning they were sad. And I asked them why they were sad, and their response sticks with me always, and it was, "We have to leave today." That is the moment when I decided that environmental education and conservation education engagement was going to be what I did for the rest of my life. And those two stories have one common denominator, and it's people. The questions that we were asked to answer is, what do you see as an urgent need in your work for climate justice? Well, first off, in my work as an environmental educator, you got to realize that you cannot have conservation without people. People are priority. People must be the #1 priority, in my opinion, in solving some of the major conservation problems that we face today, such as global climate change. Now, I see this kind of as a threefold piece. We need three major things in my work in order to really start moving the needle in climate justice and climate action. One is we definitely need to focus on an increase in scientific and environmental literacy within not just youth, but definitely adults as well. And when we are designing conservation programming, when we are designing innovative projects, we need to keep humans at the center of the design process. And that's a communication theory that's known as community-based conservation design. It's really combining social sciences and conservation sciences. Now, what I mean by scientific literacy is I define it as three different layers. You have basic science literacy, functional science literacy, and operational science literacy. Ideally, we would like everyone to get to the level of operational science literacy, which is the ability to use scientific ways of thinking to pursue solutions to problems. Now, basic scientific literacy, consists of awareness that science information may be present and relevant, but no, we want people to be able to use a scientific way of thinking in order to pursue solutions to problems. Now, as a museum and aquarium, I'm going to shift gears here slightly. We need to change our mindsets and our mission at informal science learning centers and reposition our skills and imagining that all museums are collaborators. First and foremost, we're all working with each other. We all have very similar missions across the country. And we need to support our community self-directed growth through sharing of our resources and skills. We're capacity builders. Museums, zoos, aquariums, and communities across the country, they're a trusted resource and they have the ability to bring people together. We need to see community purpose as our central mission. Shift our focus from providing outreach as a transactional service to serving as social actors, working towards common social purposes with our community partners. And this is something that the River Museum here in Dubuque is starting to transition into, which is really, really exciting because this is fairly new for zoos and aquariums. Now, #3, so #1 was increased science literacy. #2, mindsets and missions of zoos, aquariums, and informal science learning centers, shifting from transactional services to more social actors working toward a common purpose with community partners. And 3 is when communicating in our environmental messages about climate change, we need to make sure that we're making it relevant to individuals, to their social groups, their locality, and their lifetime. As Chuck had mentioned, agriculture is king in Iowa. Iowa is ag. And so agriculture is where you really need to root your messages when speaking about climate change in the Midwest, whether you be discussing community resiliency, soil health, economic viability, and how you do not need to separate economic success from environmental health. Those types of messages are what are going to resonate most, and it's also where we as Iowans can have the greatest impact in solving the climate crisis. Now, within that, you got to separate politics from science. Climate change is not a belief. Climate change is measurable. Climate change is scientific fact. We need to increase emotional and empathetic reasoning within people, especially children, because even though it may not be in your backyard, this is something that is impacting other people around the world. We need to have greater access to hopeful success stories. When's the last time you saw a happy, positive message on the news that wasn't a fluff piece that was designed to distract you from all the craziness that they've been reporting on for the last 3 hours? We need to make mainstream success stories, positive stories, stories of people that are doing good. And we need to overcome this concept of cognitive dissonance through strategically based messaging. And there's a network that's working on this known as the National Network on Oceans and Climate Change Interpretation. And what I mean by cognitive dissonance is I suffer from it. We all suffer from it. We search out information that supports our preconceived beliefs. And then if anything challenges those beliefs, we sometimes get defensive. You have to be very, very conscious of that issue of cognitive dissonance. It's not people doing bad to do bad. It's not people disagreeing with you to just disagree with you. People in some cases actually feel as though they're being attacked personally. And you need to understand that. You need to have that high emotional intelligence to be empathetic of other people if you're going to communicate effectively about climate change. Now, the second question, what steps can local community members take to address this need through actions and advocacy? Well, the first one is talk about climate change. Do not be afraid to talk about climate change. It isn't a bad phrase. It isn't a bad word. And for those of us in the public eye, such as myself, we need to be strategic in our messaging. Crisis messaging does not work. Crisis messaging is a trap that we fall into. We need to turn outward, and we need to become community catalysts by sharing success stories. You do need to vote, yes, but I'm not just talking about voting at the polls. I'm also talking about voting with our wallets. We as consumers, we have the power to shape markets. What you buy, how you choose to entertain yourself, those choices can really drive big collective change within the markets. And we need to support collaborations, especially around things such as soil health and regenerative agriculture, innovation in energy efficiency and energy production. We need to use what nature has taught us, this is known as biomimicry, and invest in natural infrastructure to mitigate from extreme weather events such as rainfall. So just supporting those initiatives with your voice, with your wallets, or with your vote are all things that we can do within the Dubuque community in order to mitigate against extreme weather conditions, which are the product of global climate change. And we need to invest in innovations. We need to invest in people. We got to put our money where our mouth is. If we're going to want to find these solutions, we're going to need to invest in a ton of different practices, knowing that not all of them are going to pan out, but we need to be investing in technology that is going to help mitigate climate change. And then lastly, and
Jared, you have 1 minute.
this is probably the most important one, and this is going to be 1 minute. I can wrap this up. Remain hopeful. We have to remain hopeful. You got to believe that something can be done, because if we let ourselves be driven down that rabbit hole of hopelessness and the belief that nothing can be done, then nothing will be done. You cannot have conservation without people. Investments in people are the solutions to climate change. Thank you so much. Look forward to some questions at the end.
Thank you, Jared. Wonderful energy. And we move on to Sadie. So Jared, you want to shut off your camera, and Sadie, if you would turn on your camera and your microphone and go ahead and begin.
Sorry about that. I was going on natural light for a while and then brought in a light, and that was a little too bright. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. Multiple of these people have created like a lasting impression on my life, and I hope to one day be exactly like most of them. Like, for instance, Jared, his job is my dream job, and he's basically the one who propelled me into that. And Corinne will talk next, and she's also, I worked with her this summer with AmeriCorps too, and she also had a lasting impression on me. All right, so for number one, recognizing an urgent need in the climate cause. So there's a lot to say about this. And personally, as a teenager, still in high school, I want to be able to say, I shouldn't have to be speaking about this. I have all these things about in life, and the reality is nobody should have to be thinking about the climate crisis that is current. However, that is what is at hand right now, and I'm happy to do it, but I think it's also, it just can't go on just the youth and the hope that youth brings. I mean, Greta Thunberg was a perfect example of this. At a youth panel for climate advocacy, she said, I am angry and I am terrified. And I totally feel that. However, getting into the actual action of things, there must be action done by all means of the age spectrum. I was lucky enough as a child to be exposed to the environment. I mean, on long car rides to Western Iowa, where my grandma was from, she would say, "Now that's a good farmer." When we saw like a ditch that was like natural and wasn't mowed, she'd always say, "That's a good farmer." And I mean, just as Representative Eisenhart said, the agriculture is Iowa. And kids aren't really exposed to that, the importance of agriculture and the environment in general, all throughout their schooling. I mean, in most areas of Iowa, it's small towns. In Elkader, we had FFA, we had 4-H. I mean, my drive to school was through tons of farmland. But when I moved to Dubuque, there wasn't FFA. I mean, there were a few 4-H. I don't even know if there is 4-H in Dubuque. But it has to be, the education has to be all throughout the school, not just in small children in elementary school, but also high schoolers. High schoolers, and for agriculture and the environment, I mean, high schoolers, this is a point in my life and my classmates' lives where it's not just our parents' opinions and what we were taught up to believe, but we're making our own opinions about things, and this is just a really instrumental part in our lives where all the education matters. And just as Jared said, it's not politics at this point, but it's reality. And it's a reality that children should be prepared to face when they're old. In addition, so Representative Eisenhart also said that we must look at this as a weather-related topic. If we saw natural disasters coming, I'm sure a lot of people, if they said it was going to directly impact them, they would prepare for it. However, natural disasters aren't foreseen. And this is also a touchy subject because in Western United States, there are forest fires right now. However, those aren't affecting us, and people throughout the whole United States aren't affected, and they might feel for those people or stuff like that. And the same thing has to do with COVID-19. Well, we know that there's a virus out there. A lot of people my age and maybe a little bit older in their 20s, well, it's not going to affect me directly, or if it does, it's not going to have a lasting impact. So we have to address this climate issue not just as a disaster that's going to gradually build. And personally, I'm not able to directly say how we're supposed to do this, but it needs to be a complete recognition that it's not just going to single out certain areas, and it's going to affect all of us. And everyone needs to know this. It cannot be politics where, well, Democrats believe this and Republicans, no, don't worry about it. It cannot be political because this is not a political issue. It's a global issue. So with recognizing globally and educating, we also need to recognize the huge amount of work that needs to be done. And not just from a natural standpoint, but with people as well. As Jared said, this is all about the people of things. And with climate justice, most of the time it has to do with what people say as climate. So natural factors, wildlife, people think of the iceberg, save the turtles, stuff like that. But there needs to be a complete recognition that this is also affecting people directly. So in natural disasters, yeah. But for example, in like Detroit, Michigan, the climate issue at hand there is disproportionately affecting people of color and low-income families. In Manhattan Island, there's also their solid waste dump there is also releasing extreme toxins that are disproportionately affecting low-income families living on Manhattan Island. In Dubuque, it's not as easy to see. We don't really have extreme toxins going out or bad water quality. But I mean, look at the Bee Branch, for example, that Jared headstrong through in the creation of. It's mostly low-income families around the area of the Bee Branch waterway and people of color. And that's an extreme amount of building that went on and work and planning to create that for low-income families. And I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the work that's going down on there, but basically it realigned the watering system so it's a natural area for people around, and it wasn't as much flooding in the area. But around that, there's also people that don't have access to that waterway who are still very much struggling and don't have access to any forms of healthy food and environment and natural environment. So while areas like Swiss Valley Nature Center are amazing for children's youth, it is not necessarily available for everyone. And it's mostly seen through people of color. So that definitely needs to be affected globally. I was phone banking for the Democratic Party recently, and I called him, man, and I was asking him if he'd be voting all Democratic. He said, well, I won't tell you what the rest of he said, but in part of it, he said, well, I won't stand for anyone that kneels down for that Black Lives Matter movement. And also look at the Democratic states. All those states have the wildfires right now. I mean, come on. And that's a prime example of how not only children should be educated, and how children throughout their schooling, throughout the whole schooling, as I said earlier, should get exposure to the environment, but also adults. Adults need to know that they should know what's going on with the climate situation, and they should be educated. And children will not do the educating for this. It's other adults, and it's the people who are on the ballot for when voting comes in November. And that's what's most important here, is that man who didn't understand the climate situation, he will be the one voting, not me, who's only 17 and won't be able to vote. So for number 2, I guess voting in particular, those who support the cause and are also mindful with their wallets, who they're getting donations from, if it's big oil industries, or if it's natural resources, noting the distinction and where they're getting their major donations from. So as adults, you have to be able to vote for those people who stand for the cause. And vote publicly. Obviously, you can't vote publicly, but telling your friends, being mindful with your actions and doing it in a public manner. Just as Sister Singrat said, when she didn't use a straw, everyone didn't use a straw, or were able to continue that in that fashion. So every single little action counts. Using a reusable straw, reusable water, all of that stuff, and doing it publicly. It's so important that you don't look at this as a political issue and standing from, well, I don't want this person to judge me because I'm doing that. It's for the climate, it's for the environment that you're living in. And that's extremely important in this situation, that you're encouraging others in a positive manner, not attacking others, because when we attack and have to use nasty words and stuff like that, we get divided. And in this situation, everyone needs to come together so that a full force is made to fix this in all areas of life. So for takeaway from me as a teenager, I would like you to vote, tell your friends to vote, educate yourselves and educate others on the situation. And if you have grandchildren or children who are young, and especially in their high school years, please, please help them maintain the passion for Earth that they might have gained as a child, and introduce them into areas of life, just as Jared said, where they're voting with their wallet, they're being mindful about their actions, and they're also like in that you can support your local businesses. You, instead of choosing to go to Starbucks, for example, you're telling your grandchild, hey, go to the local coffee shop that's down the street, you know? All these little actions count. And overall, with all of our education, we need to accept that there's going to have to be a lot of action to create the wanted outcome of not having to be in a time limit of when the climate's going to explode. So thank you all for coming for your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sadie. And we'll move on to Corinne. So please turn off your mic. And Corinne, if you want to go ahead and begin.
Thank you so much. It's kind of unique to go at the end and listen to everyone else speak before you and hear elements of things that you had thought resonate with the other people. So apologize if a little bit of this is a summary, but I do feel like the voices of the panelists that came before me definitely resonated with me, and I found pieces of what they said in my own thoughts that I had prepared before this. Being a science teacher at Wahlert, obviously climate education is one of the first things that I think about when I think about climate justice. If you don't understand what's going on, why it's happening, or all of the dynamic elements that go into a changing climate, it's really hard for you to wrap your mind around what you can do about that. So in terms of climate education, I think it's really critical that we not only look at it at a local level. Obviously in Iowa, as Chuck mentioned, agriculture is a huge component, and it's easy to look at the impact that climate change can have on our local agriculture, but also look beyond our local impact and look nationally, and then even more important, globally. Because quite often some of the most dramatic impacts of climate change currently are in areas that are quite distant from us, areas with much less technology, less resources, and less ability to modify their environment in this changing climate. And so they're much more dramatically impacted. I think one of the things that stood out to me the most as being the faculty moderator for our LEAP Club, we hold a Earth Day week series of events every single year, and we always hold a prayer service for Earth Day. And a couple of years ago, we had a local Marshallese student speak. We always have a speaker during the prayer service, and she talked about the impact that climate change was having on the Marshall Islands. And that brought this global element to the students that were there that they had never thought of or considered the impact that climate change was already having on people far away, but that people that are local have relationships to those people. They're their family. They care about what's happening to them, and they're directly affected when their family, maybe half a world away, suffers from actions that we and those before us have participated in. So I think it's critical to expand beyond the local and look at a wider spectrum, because I think seeing the impact that it has on such a large scale can fuel our desire to do something. Along that, I think as an educator, obviously focusing on data is critical. I'm a science teacher, so data and being able to analyze data, break down data, determine if data is trustworthy is a critical component of what I try to bring to my classroom, and I think is really important for all people to work on. Where are sources of information coming from? And I think bringing that questioning into your home, into your discussion with people that you know, your children or other adults, is a really critical step in something that everyone can do, is having that questioning mind, that thing that maybe when we were kids kind of got scared out of us sometimes if we asked too many questions, and adults in our lives got angry at us for asking those questions. So bringing that questioning curiosity back into your home, into your heart, and really critically looking at information that you get and where it comes from, and doing your best to try to understand that source is a huge component of the world that we live in, because so much information can be shared by anyone. And I think teaching children to question that information and to really search out the root to determine if they can trust that information is a big part of what I try to do, but every parent at home, every grandparent can bring to children as well. On that note, just education's not enough. Action is critical. We've heard that come up again and again, is that action not only needs to take place in our schools with our youth, but needs to be led by adults and people in our community. And so giving students the ability to take action, I think, is critical. And I think the way that they are going to both learn and be inspired to do that is by adults modeling that action. And that's something that personally I try to bring into Wahlert. Not only am I a science teacher at Wahlert, but my husband and I have started our own small urban farm. We try to live what we want other people to be inspired by. Growing your own food. Again, agriculture is a huge part of Iowa, especially when we think about the fact, and there's a little bit of variety in the data, but it generally revolves around 90% of our food being imported from out of state. And I think we all can realize that the more we truck food in from long distances, the more fossil fuels are spent. The quality of that food generally goes down because it has to be harvested incredibly early in order to survive that long distance travel. And there's a lot of creativity that you can use to inspire students and others to solve these problems and solutions. And the food situation in Iowa can be one of those inspiring pieces. And so that's one kind of truth that I try to live and share my efforts to grow more local food for people that want it and for my own family. And then how to save and preserve that food. So that's a huge component of what both inspire, and as adults, we all have our niche. So food might not be your niche. There might be other ways that you can inspire someone through your actions to take a step to have an impact. And it was said multiple times that that impact doesn't have to be astronomical. You don't have to go out and purchase thousands of dollars in solar panels or put in a geothermal system or buy electric car, but you can take very small steps that start to accumulate over time when everyone does that. And modeling that in any way that inspires you will inspire others. And so along those lines, I think education needs to have a solution focus. Jared mentioned the need for hope. And I see students get bogged down when they talk about climate change in the negative and in the blame. And instead, inspiring solutions is huge. Inspiring creativity and the STEM fields to empower students to take that next step. Obviously, Sadie's showing through her leading of the environmental group at Senior that she wants to take that next step, and empowering those people that want to take that step is critical. So leading students towards an action, solution-based focus and inspiring them through your own action is a huge part of how we're going to eventually find solutions and make a difference. So to kind of wrap up, obviously, you know, in terms of what can we do, what can local members do, find that one thing and take that one first step in towards modeling action of making a difference. Think local in your purchases, think local in your support. Sadie mentioned shopping at the local coffee shop, shopping at the local farmer's market, or supporting a small farmer. And then supporting those small community organizations or organizations at every level that are community partners for education. I've been really fortunate as a teacher at Wahlert to have a lot of flexibility and leniency to work with community partners and get my students out of the classroom. And that's another area where a lot of connection, relationship can be formed with the environment, as was mentioned by several others. Forming that relationship to get people to care about the environment inspires them to do more. So supporting those community partners that make that possible. Places like Convivium Urban Farmstead, the River Museum, and then the efforts of Sustainable Dubuque, which help to provide funds for people to do action, is critical. So find that one thing that you can do, take that one small step, and hopefully that will lead to more steps down the line. And through your actions, you'll inspire others to start their own change. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Corinne. You can keep your camera on and also your microphone. Well, want to thank each and every one of you for your wonderful and inspirational words and insights. We will now move to the questions and answer period. Lori Apple, the director of the Canticle Creation Center, has been fielding the questions, and now she will serve as moderator of the questions. So panelists, please turn on your cameras and microphones, and we'll continue on.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, panelists, for your wonderful insight and suggestions to our participants. Corinne, we're going to start with you. I was really impressed by the modeling that you do for your students and community members regarding care for our common home. One of the questions that was fielded here is, in an effort to have parents really teach their children at a young age about the importance of taking care of the environment, what are some good resources that parents could access to help their children build that foundational piece?
That's a really great question. I think that, you know, one resource, of course, can be your school, wherever you go. There are a lot of climate-based science standards at every level of education, from elementary to middle school to high school. So I think maybe it's just because I'm a science teacher, but I think your teacher can be a great resource if you're not sure where to start. I think we're really fortunate in Dubuque to have so many wonderful organizations like the River Museum, which are great climate partners. So I think getting your children to those places to form that relationship is also a really great step and a really great partner. Beyond that, I think just that engagement piece that we've talked about, getting them outside, getting them to love and appreciate their surroundings so that they have that desire to protect it. You know, it doesn't really even take resources for that, but just to share that with them, I think is a huge piece of building that foundation at a really young age.
Very good. Great ideas. Thank you, Corinne. Okay, Sadie, we're going to move on to you. A question that was posed for you. Besides adults voting, what ways do you think are effective for teens as modeling for them in addressing this urgent need? And then another question for you, Sadie, you can springboard from that. What brought you to be so committed today?
Sorry, I had mute on default because my dog is barking at my cat in the background. So when I went to Elkader, Iowa, Elkader Community School is actually recognized as a green school. And I kind of took that for granted. So when I moved to Dubuque and I went from a school that was composting, they were using local products for food, for lunch. They had all reusable silverware, like the whole shebang, right? What's ideal for a school. And then when I went to Dubuque at senior, and we had disposable utensils, sometimes throw away like trays, like polar opposites, right? So I'm technically answering the second question first, but it was a real awakening for me, realizing that what Al-Qaeda was exhibiting wasn't global necessarily at all. And so that kind of drove me to want to make a change and make sure it was global in a sense. I meant to talk about that in my first go around, but thank you all for your patience. I actually get really nervous on Zoom despite there being no one watching as it shows up on the camera. So then for the first question, an effective way for teens to address this urgent need. So right now, a lot of high schools do have green teams, and if they don't, they can start one, as I did. If it's not addressed in the high school standpoint, community or colleges in the community, private colleges especially, often have a green team and community outreach. So I got into contact with the Dubuque area. Jacob Jansen, he went to Al-Qaeda and then he moved to Dubuque, and he went to Loris. So I got into contact with the Loris Leaf Club, and so that kind of helped me kickstart the Green Team also. In Dubuque, another great resource is the Dubuque Metropolitan Area Solid Waste Agency. Bev Wagner is our community coordinator for AmeriCorps in the Green Iowa standpoint, and she is a great outreach to see how you're managing your waste levels. That also goes on with composting in the community and how that works at on a landfill standpoint. So I really encourage also other teens to find out who their community outreaches are and like pull together and see what they need in a standpoint of what they see most effective and how you could relate that or change things from your high school standpoint as a teenager.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Sadie. I'm sure we're going to hear wonderful things about you in the future. Thanks. And for Sister Marie, as mentioned in your bio, the Sisters of St. Francis have had many initiatives over the years in their care for our common home. Can you speak a little bit more about those initiatives?
Well, sure. All of these endeavors that we've undertaken, we've done a lot of research and learned from others too, that's for sure. You know, like for example, natural burial, when we started our exploration of that, we learned a lot from the BVMs across town and also the Cincinnati Dominicans who have used the natural burial already. And so, you know, that education part is how do we learn from others also. And I think people spoke a lot about modeling and so on. So, but also, you know, somebody was speaking about, you know, we don't have to do all, you know, you know, thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to implement some of these things. For example, I didn't mention this before, but some of you know probably we had some advertisement in the newspaper about the goats on the go. And those to help in our acres of woodland to get rid of invasive species instead of using chemicals. So the goats have visited us 3 times, 3 different years, and hopefully the invasive species are kind of getting under control. When somebody, I think it was Sadie, was talking about the AmeriCorps, we had a AmeriCorps team here a couple of years ago, and in conjunction with 4 Mounds, and they helped. One of the projects that they did was trying to improve our prairie by cutting out trees and so on that were growing up. So some of these things, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, a really huge effort. We've put in, you know, a lot of effort into like our solar panels and our geothermal and so on. But some of the items that we use or have done is, you know, they are just everyday kind of things. We just have to, sometimes it just takes time to step back and think before you act. The thing too, we were talking about globally, is we have a sister water project that we have helped in Tanzania and in Honduras, where we have or have had sisters staying because they have a water problem with getting clean water. So we, through many hundreds of people donating to that project, have helped nearly 400,000 people to gain water access. And so that's, you know, you do things globally, you do things locally. The big thing is you do something.
Very good. Thank you, Marie. And Chuck, you mentioned the piece with Iowa Agriculture. What action steps can our local farmers do to ensure their care for their fields in an eco-friendly manner?
Well, we've had now since 2013, it's called the NRS, the Nutrient Reduction Strategy. Many of the farm groups, there's a whole menu of things they can do. Many farm groups are out there supposedly educating their members on what those are. We have soil and water conservation districts that are available to them. We could spend an hour and a half talking about specific actions that can be taken. I think the bigger question is, what will motivate action on their part, and how can taking care of the land be seen and recognized as a profitable venture, that they can make a living off of doing what's right by the land. Those are conversations that aren't necessarily being led by the agricultural organization. They're starting to. Soil health is a door that we can go through to start talking more about that. Jared referenced it a little bit before. And from the individual perspective, I think what we can do most quickly to impact what happens on the farm is maybe some of the things that Corinne was just talking about a little bit ago. I'm going to share my screen. I don't know if you'll let me, but there's a book called Food Fix that I just got through reading that I recommend to people. I'll hold it up. It's by a doctor named Mark Hyman. It's the wrong book. I already took it back to the library. It's called Food Fix by Dr. Mark Hyman, and it looks at our food system from across the spectrum, not just including the climate issue, but also from the health standpoint, from the worker standpoint, from the environmental standpoint as well, not to mention the fact that we need to start eating healthier. And if we can start changing our habits and our system as consumers, we will have an impact on the agricultural system that will lead farmers down that path. And I think that's a more productive discussion for us to have in groups like this.
Very good. Thank you. And Jared, I don't know if you're able to log back in. Yeah, I think we may have lost. Oh, there he is.
Just
Hey,
muted.
Jared, question for you.
Questions here? A
Yes,
quick
for
response.
Jared. I love your positive energy that you portray so easily. How can your positivity impact someone who's very reluctant to advocate for climate change, or maybe someone who doesn't even believe it exists?
Yeah, so that's that whole concept of strategically framed messages based on research, using research metaphors and what have you. So explanatory chains, avoiding traps, things like that. One of the strategies that I imply or use when working with folks who are resistant to climate change, because they see it as a belief. They have, again, politicized it. It's one of those really disappointing things in conservation education when a political affiliation influences your understanding of science. And so we like to bridge and pivot, is what we call it, away from unproductive dialogue. We don't want to reinforce what that individual stated, because the moment that you reinforce their belief, they stop listening to you. And so it takes a lot. It's like, for instance, if someone were to come to me like, it's a drop in the bucket, how can you possibly think that people could influence the global climate? And you go, well, when we burn fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas, and we're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It traps heat against the surface of the planet. And as you warm a planet, you're going to change these weather systems, and we're going to see an increase in extreme weather events. And then you make it relevant and timely to their life, and you build in some of the local connections around agriculture, around flooding, around nutrient reduction, soil health. And so you're tying climate change, which has been politicized, to something like water quality, which people can really see. And it's something that is tangible, and it isn't as abstract, because again, global climate change is a very abstract concept. It's invisible for the most part, unless you have major catastrophes that you're seeing. And it is long-term, hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, that we see our climate changing. So you need to get it out of the abstract and into the tangible. But you got to do it in a way not alienating a person, but you're also not reinforcing their unproductive beliefs. That the moment you reinforce those beliefs, you completely lose that person. So in those types of communications, that's how I approach those situations. Now, for those who don't have experience doing this kind of stuff, yeah, it can get kind of tricky, right? But you just chit chat, talk about it, share your beliefs, stay civil, and be hopeful. There's always a solution. I mean, tell good stories. Good stories are. So the crisis. Okay, I'll quit here after this, Lori. I mentioned that crisis messaging is a trap, and it is, because we're numb to catastrophe. We're numb to crisis. The moment you say something like, the polar bears are all dying, there's a starving polar bear, and this is why you should care for climate change, you're going to care about that, most people, for about the amount of time until there's another crisis that comes into your mind. And then you care about that. And then there's another crisis. And then you care about that for a little bit. But you never actually take action on any of these messages that you're receiving. Now, if you're sharing solutions, success stories that are trying to prevent or solve these problems, and then giving people the opportunity to participate in action or recommendations on how they can take action, the more they are given opportunity to practice those, the more likely they are to change their beliefs in the long term. So hope, solutions-based messaging, strategically framed messaging, bridge and pivoting strategies. There's a lot of research that goes into communicating what would be considered a controversial subject. I don't consider climate change a controversial subject. It's a fact. It's like I'm 6'7" with my sandals on. That's a fact.
Very good. Thank you, Jared. Okay, to end this time together, I would ask each panelist to share one word of hope for our audience. I'm going to just go through how people are seen on the screen from my view. So Chuck, we're going to start with you. One word of hope.
Read.
Read. Very good. Thank you, Chuck. Corinne.
Engage.
Marie.
Act.
Sadie.
Because I'm a child and I like to be a little extra, I'm going to say 4 words: taking the inconvenient actions.
Ah, very good. And finally, Jared. Can you say it in one word, Jared?
Be the catalyst. Catalyst.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Catalyst.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. It's been very inspiring. You've given us lots to think about, to be hopeful, to walk away from this evening filled with hope. And on behalf of the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Sisters of St. Francis and the Canticle of Creation Center, we thank you from the bottoms of our heart. And also thank you for our audience for joining us. We know that each of you are doing great works wherever you are to care for the earth. And a special thank you, I just want to say that to Susie Wright, our IT person, who made tonight's program possible. If you would want more information about upcoming events and action alerts, you may email myself at justice@bbmsisters.org or Lori Apple at osfbbq.org. These email addresses will be on a slideshow at the end of the seminar. Also, though, for those who registered for this Zoom webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with information on how to access a recording of this webinar, as well as more information about events and action alerts. So, as you know, 50 years ago, Earth Day happened, and it swayed public opinion by over 30% and caused a social movement. So can we in our time. Thank you, and you can hang on here for this last information, and we'll get the name of the book to you that Chuck mentioned. Once again, have a good evening and keep on celebrating this wonderful creation.